From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to take you inside the making of TT's 2025 Top 100 Logistics Companies list, which we just published on April 14th. This annual ranking provides an updated look at North America's largest 3PLs based on annual revenue. The list includes the industry's top freight brokers, freight forwarders, warehousing and fulfillment providers, and dedicated contract carriers. We compile this top 100 list by gathering updated data from an annual survey conducted by TT and by working closely with 3PL research and consulting firm Armstrong & Associates. The updated rankings are available now online at ttnews.com, and if you haven't already done so, you can get exclusive access to the complete version of our Top 100 report by subscribing to Transport Topics at ttn.ws/ttsubscribe. And now, to discuss this year's Top 100 Logistics Companies report and our biggest takeaways from the project, I'm going to bring in my colleague Mike Senatore, Features Coordinator at Transport Topics. Thanks for joining the conversation, Mike.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
So I think it's always helpful to start by explaining to our listeners how we gather this data and how we actually assemble the top 100 and the related sector lists, right? It's just a lot of information, it's a lot of data. So a little bit of orientation, I think, is helpful here. So Mike, could you give us a quick overview of that process?
Sure. The primary method of gathering information for the top 100 logistics is through the survey we send out to our industry contacts. The survey collects operating and financial data from some of the largest 3PLs in North America and allows us to get a clear of the market as a whole and how each company fared in the previous year. Our partners on the project at Armstrong & Associates assist us with additional visibility into the market and help us to fill in the gaps and ensure that we're painting an accurate picture of the industry in the past year.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think the key metric to understand is top line revenue, right? That's how we're ranking the companies. Basically that's, I think, the best representation of your overall size. So it's not a list of who we think is the most successful or the best. It's based on size. So this is a qualitative report.
In the face of uncertainty, some things remain steady. Like the Cummins 2027 X15, built on 25 plus years of experience and delivering up to 4% better fuel efficiency in a weight-neutral system. The X15 gives you the strength to move forward fearlessly and confidence that no matter the obstacle, you can and will rise above it. The 2027 X15, forever rising. Estimates based on preliminary testing. Individual results may vary.
But now that we set the stage there, I want to go ahead and jump right into the updated rankings. As our listeners may recall, we included Amazon's logistics operations on our top 100 for the first time last year, with the company debuting at number 1. That was a big change at the very top. It's really no surprise to see Amazon right back at number 1 this year by a wide margin. In addition to being the world's largest online retailer, Amazon has built this massive fulfillment network and offers a range of third-party logistics and supply chain management services to businesses selling their products on Amazon.com, as well as other e-commerce platforms. Moving right down to number 2, it's also not a surprise to see North America's largest freight broker, C.H. Robinson. The big mover, though, within the top 5 this year is GXO, a contract logistics provider that spun off from XPO a few years back. GXO climbs 2 spots to number 3 this year, followed by J.B. Hunt at number 4 and UPS's supply chain solutions business rounding out the top 5, even though it sold its Coyote Logistics freight brokerage business last year. And we'll have more to say about that shortly. Glancing at the rest of the top 5, we see large freight forwarders like Expeditors International at number 6, Kuehne + Nagel's North American operations at number 8. Between those are Ryder System. We're excluding their truck leasing business, but Ryder has really built a large logistics and dedicated fleet operation that's now number 7 on this list. Freight broker TQL moves up 1 spot to number 9 this year. Food and restaurant logistics and freight brokerage provider Armada Sunset Holdings cracks the top 10 this year for the first time. Before I turn it over to Mike, another company I'll quickly highlight is a refrigerated warehousing provider Lineage, which went public last year with a 4.4 billion IPO. I believe that was the largest IPO of 2024, in fact. It's a really big move to see them go public, and the company moves up 3 spots to number 12 on our list this year. So, Mike, we don't have time on this podcast to go through each and every company on the top 100 list, let alone the sector list. We have hundreds more companies on those. But just glancing at the top 100, what are some of the ranking changes or newcomers to the list that stood out the most to you this year?
Well, as you mentioned, GXO made a major leap within the top 5 this year. They ranked number 5 on last year's list, but come in at number 3 based on 2024 data. GXO saw revenue increases in each quarter of 2024, and it made for a record-setting year for the logistics provider after its spinoff from XPO in 2021. They also expanded their global reach last year. They acquired Wincanton, which was a United Kingdom-based transportation and logistics provider. A lot of growth for GXO, for sure, in 2024. Elsewhere in the top 10, Expeditors International. They also had a strong rebound year last year. On our rankings last year, Expeditors fell 5 spots down our list with significant declines in revenue and total freight volumes, but those figures stabilized last year, and they increased gross revenue by just under $1 billion, which helped them to regain 1 spot on our list. They came in at number 6 on this year's top 100.
The complete top 100 logistics companies and sector lists that are associated with the publication are available online at ttnews.com. And of course, Transport Topics subscribers receive the print version packaged with the April 14th issue of Transport Topics. If you're not a subscriber, you can sign up at ttn.ws/ttsubscribe or text TTSubscribe to 571-622-0001. So next, I'd like to touch on the freight market conditions that 3PLs experienced last year and how that business environment helped shape this year's top 100 list. So as we all know, the transportation industry has been experiencing slow freight market recovery, and we continue to see that in the data we gathered for this report. Looking at full year 2024 gross revenue for the companies on our top 100, about 60 of them did manage to grow their businesses last year, but mostly at a modest pace overall. That's compared to a down year in 2023. So still a pretty slow growth environment. I should also mention about a third of the companies on the list still posted declining revenue last year. So still very much a mixed bag. Mike, what would you extrapolate from our top 100 companies' financial results from 2024 when you compare that with the prior year?
So the market did continue its upward trajectory last year. That allowed for a majority of the 3PLs on our list to grow their revenues, but it was at a fairly modest pace due to economic uncertainty and the gradual climb to a freight market recovery. And you mentioned about 60 companies on our top 100 list growing their revenues last year. And that percentage holds for different sections of the list. If you look at the top 10 specifically, 6 out of those 10 companies posted increased revenue, as did 12 of the top 20. So that kind of percentage does generally apply. According to Armstrong and Associates estimates, the total 3PL market in North America grew by 1.6% in 2024. And that stands in stark contrast to 2023, which saw a 12.8% decline in total market size. And so this bounce back, it was obviously welcomed by 3PLs, but it doesn't really paint the picture of a recovery.
Yeah, so clearly moving in the right direction, and we're seeing some improvement, but we're still climbing out of a very deep trough, unfortunately.
Definitely.
And that's what the industry has been dealing with for a few years now. Of course, the top 100 list, since it's based on revenue in 2024, is kind of backward looking, the recap of the year that was. We also spent some time in this report looking ahead and at current market conditions now that we're a few months into 2025. As we shift our focus to the present and the future business landscape for 3PLs, the conversation now is really all about the second Trump administration's new tariffs, rapidly shifting trade policies, and how those changes could alter international supply chains and freight patterns moving forward. Clearly, this is a moving target. It's very much in flux. It seems every couple days, situation changes. So we just need the dust to settle to have a clearer idea of what's a negotiating tactic and what is a lasting policy change that could alter freight patterns long term moving forward. I think a lot of companies are standing pat, maybe hitting the pause button, trying to understand what this will look like when the dust settles, because there's a lot of uncertainty about how this will all play out. And that makes business planning extremely difficult. Clearly, we hope to see some of this solidify and see some clarity on what this will look like for international trade and cross-border freight some point soon in the coming months. I think it highlights the growing importance for 3PLs to be flexible, to be adaptable. That's really the main takeaway of my cover story for this year's Top 100 Logistics Companies report, is that it's really more important than ever for 3PLs to be nimble. They have to be able to respond to these changes and continue to build resilient supply chains so they can adapt to whatever this future looks like.
In the face of uncertainty, some things remain steady, like the Cummins 2027 X15, built on 25 plus years of experience and delivering up to 4% better fuel efficiency in a weight-neutral system. The X15 gives you the strength to move forward fearlessly and confidence that no matter the obstacle, you can and will rise above it. The 2027 X15, forever rising. Estimates based on preliminary testing. Individual results may vary.
Mike, do you have anything to add about what these ongoing trade policy changes mean for the 3PL industry? It's hard to say exactly, to react to something that's still so uncertain, but what's your take on this?
Right. Well, like you said, flexibility has become more and more central to the business plan for 3PLs. The market conditions have been volatile due to the tariff concerns and potential regulatory changes. It's not an environment where you, as a business owner, want to be unable to change with the conditions. The potential impact of widespread tariffs would be significant, especially for international freight forwarders. The looming threat of tariffs has created a spike in demand due to American businesses hoping to stock up on inventory before these prices are affected potentially by tariffs. But were the tariffs to actually be implemented, that would, we expect, tamp down volumes, and which would stifle growth for a lot of freight forwarders and create a really challenging environment. As you said, it's difficult to be certain in any predictions with trade policy fluctuating pretty often at this point. But what we do know for sure is that if tariffs were to go into effect as they've been laid out, it would be problematic for a lot of global freight handlers.
We'll be watching this closely as it develops, and we'll have much more to say and report, as that dust settles and we start to understand what the policies start to look like. As always, I always like to spend a little bit of time, as we review our top 100 lists, looking at mergers and acquisitions and, how that has changed the list. There's always a few examples, and, that's true yet again. As you might recall, if you're a loyal listener to this podcast, we discussed M&A in the logistics sector 12 months ago. We spent some time discussing the future of Coyote Logistics, which UPS was looking to sell. And sure enough, a couple months later, freight broker RXO announced it had agreed to purchase Coyote for about $1 billion. And that deal closed in September. RXO ranks number 16 on this year's Top 100 with $4.5 billion in revenue in 2024. We fully expect to see the company climb further up the list next year after it realizes a full year of additional revenue from that Coyote acquisition. So definitely expect RXO to climb pretty significantly on our list next year. Another acquisition I'll mention here is Schneider acquiring Cowan Systems late last year. That's a big combination that increases the size of Schneider's already very large dedicated fleet. Last year, NFI acquired the brokerage business of Transfix, which has shifted its business model away from digital freight brokerage to focus on transportation software and data services. Looking ahead, the biggest deal you can imagine is number 11 on our list, DSV, agreeing to purchase DB Schenker from Deutsche Bahn. That's a deal valued at just shy of $16 billion. These are two huge global multinational logistics providers, multimodal, diversified, And that would be, of course, a very large acquisition expected to close this quarter. We're watching that closely as well. For now, though, on this year's list, we kept them separate because the deal hadn't closed. So DSV at number 11 and Schenker at number 25. And also, just to bring it home for our market in North America, I'll mention that Schenker is the parent of USA Truck, which it acquired in 2022. Mike, what did you find most interesting about these acquisitions? And are there any others you'd like to highlight here?
The purchase of Coyote by RXO was certainly the headliner. Coyote and RXO ranked numbers 4 and 7 respectively on our sector list from last year of the largest freight brokers in North America. So this deal really creates a giant in that brokerage market. And UPS's decision to sell off Coyote is allowing them to better focus on their core business of parcel delivery. Meanwhile, RXO's integration of Coyote, it really quickly scaled up their brokerage services and increased their capacity. Some other major players on the list have also been engaging in M&A activity in the past year. One example is WWEX Group, the parent company of Worldwide Express, Global Trans, and Unishippers. In February, they announced plans to acquire Gear Logistics, which last year ranked number 61 on our freight brokerage sector list, expanding their freight brokerage operations similar to what we saw by RXO. And one note on the planned acquisition of Schenker from DSV, just yesterday actually, DSV cleared the last of the regulatory hurdles that they were working on, particularly with the EU. And so that deal is set to close in the coming weeks. So that's something we're keeping an eye on and will definitely be reflected on next year's Top 100.
Yeah. And just to add to the conversation about UPS, you can read a story in the Top 100 Logistics Report about their investments in healthcare logistics. That's been a big growth area for UPS's logistics operations, supply chain solutions division. They've spun off the big freight brokerage business that was Coyote, and they're leaning into healthcare logistics as a growth area. The margins are quite high, and there's a lot of demand for that. You can read more about that in the print version and also online at ttnews.com. So along with our top 100 list, we've alluded a couple times to our industry sector lists. So these are kind of a breakdown of the 3PL industry based on specific segments. That includes freight brokers, warehousing providers, both dry and cold storage, dedicated contract carriers, freight forwarders, air and ocean. So we have breakdowns of companies compared with their peers in those specific segments of the 3PL industry. Mike, are there any big changes or points of interest you'd like to discuss as we review the updated sector lists?
So it was a mixed bag across the different market segments for 3PLs last year. As we discussed, there was a significant amount of mergers and acquisitions, and that affected a lot of the large players in the freight brokerage market. We'll see the effects of that much clearer next year. Taking a look at our warehousing list, there was very little change to our rankings for both dry storage and cold storage providers. The top 10 dry storage firms remain the same on this year's list. Looking at cold storage, Lineage and Americold remain as the two industry leaders in that segment, especially with Lineage's IPO from 2024. Looking at dedicated contract carriers, a lot of them largely reduced fleet sizes last year, demand continuing to struggle to meet capacity, although Schneider's acquisition of Cowan Systems did provide them with a boost to their fleet size, so they kind of bucked the trend in that sense. On the other hand, global air and ocean freight forwarders enjoyed a pretty solid year of recovery in 2024. Of the top 10 ocean freight forwarders on our list, 8 of them increased their volumes of freight handled last year, as did 7 of the top 10 air freight forwarders. So definitely a good year to be an international transportation firm.
Yeah. So before we wrap up here, I'd just like to mention that we're always encouraging companies to participate in our Top 100 Logistics Companies project by filling out our annual survey and sharing details about their operations. Many companies do this already, but we're always looking for more participation. We publish data on quite a few mid-sized companies. The top 100 are all pretty large, of course. when you look at our sector rankings, which are also extensive, you don't necessarily have to be a huge organization to earn a spot somewhere on those lists. Mike, how can companies get involved and participate in next year's Top 100 Logistics project if they aren't already doing so?
So the best way to participate is to reach out to us directly. You can contact us, tteditor@trucking.org, and we'll be in touch to obtain the information we're looking at for our Top 100 list and for our various sector lists. Submitting your company's operating and financial data to us directly, that's the best way to ensure you're considered for inclusion in future editions of our lists.
Thank you very much for joining the podcast and sharing your insights on our Top 100 Logistics Companies report. Thank you for doing your part to bring the project to life. You handle a lot of the heavy lifting that gets this project to the finish line, from the start to the finish, gathering the data, parsing it, organizing it, examining it. It's a lot of work, but it's rewarding when we can get to the finish line and share the finished report with the industry. I know it resonates and is a valuable resource for 3PLs and people across the supply chain. So thank you for your part.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words.
We hope you've enjoyed this in-depth look at Transport Topics' 2025 Top 100 Logistics Companies list. You can view the entire Top 100 and sector lists online at ttnews.com. And if you're a TT subscriber, you already have a hard copy packaged with the April 14th print issue of Transport Topics. If you're not a subscriber, you can sign up at ttn.ws/ttsubscribe or text TT-subscribe to 571-622-0001. We'll be back on this podcast later this year with additional episodes of our Inside the List series as we produce the rest of our annual supplements, including our Top 100 for-hire carriers list in June. If you've enjoyed this episode of RoadSigns, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with me and the RoadSigns team. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. And of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with a fresh episode of RoadSigns. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open Transport Topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with Transport Topics.